Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Crystal, and now in today's video I want to share the pros and cons of living in Florida. You know what's kind of funny is that a lot of people that I have talked to, like my DMs and everything, like anywhere, they're like, wow, you actually live in Florida. I'm like, wait, what? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I like living in Florida. It's not my forever place for sure. There are things I love and there are things that I hate. About 2 weeks ago, I did have someone who DM'd me and was like, girl, yes or no, should I live and move to Florida? I was so shocked and so flattered that she would ask me, you know, if she should actually move to Florida. For me, I like it here. Do I love it here? No. And I didn't realize all the different things about Florida until I started traveling. But yeah, I decided to literally take my handy dandy notebook, and I do have my notes here, so if I am looking down, that's what I'm looking at, about all the things that I love and hate about Florida. I took a picture and I sent it to her. Initially, she decided that she was not a Florida girl and she was going to stay where she was and hopefully find somewhere else to eventually, you know, move on with her life. So yeah, congratulations, Cassidy, good job, girl. Now, so I wanted to go ahead and share those pros and cons with you guys so you guys can decide for yourself if you live in Florida. And yes, girl, I live in Florida. So many people thought I lived in California, so many people thought I lived in Arizona, and I was like, no, Florida. It's Florida, even though it says in my bio in my Instagram Orlando. So yeah, I want to go ahead and share those pros and cons with you guys, and I want to just say these are just my perspective on Orlando, and I'm not talking about Florida in general. I've never lived in Miami or Jacksonville, Gainesville, the Panhandle. I've only lived in Orlando and a little bit of the prospect, like the cities around it. So when I'm talking about Orlando, just so we are clear on that. So if you guys want to, you know, get to know me and get to know Florida a little bit better, just continue watching the video. Now, the first thing I have to say that is a con, and we're going to do the cons first and end on a good note. You know, only good vibes here. These are only things to help. So let's go ahead and get started again. So the first con I would definitely have to say is that Florida is very, very crowded. You really have to plan your day out. You really have to understand where you're going, how crowded it's going to be, because truly and honestly, there are lines everywhere. There's traffic everywhere you go. Sometimes you're like elbow to elbow with people. There's always something going on somewhere in Orlando. So when you go places, you have to understand this is their busiest time, and maybe you should consider going on a different day. And that could be a real turn off for a lot of people, because you are really surrounded by a lot of tourists, a lot of older people, a lot of younger people. You're surrounded by families. You're surrounded everywhere you go. Now, the next thing I would have to say here, which is a con, is that there is a ton of traffic here. You really do have to plan out your day in Florida. You can't just decide to go somewhere at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or in the evening, because honestly, that's the worst time. Honestly, I would say between 3 to like 6. Depends on where you're going, is not a good idea, just because of the fact that the traffic is insane here. And I have been stuck in traffic for hours at a time. Sometimes, especially when school is in, or you know, you're going to a touristy area, it can really, something that takes you 15 minutes can take you 30 to 45 minutes, just because the traffic here is so bad. Now, my next con is going to be that, and I'm going to brace myself when I say this, there are a ton of really, really, really bad drivers here. I'll never forget, I was going down I-4, which is the main interstate here, and there was a guy that went from one lane all the way to the other with no turn signals, no stopping, and he just kept going. And I literally was just like, or the worst things, the worst thing I've ever experienced is somebody literally getting out of their car because they were road raging to approach the person. I'm like, I can't with y'all. I can't. So yeah, just be prepared for that. And I'm not even gonna get started on the fact that when it rains here in Florida, people really really don't know how to drive, and they oftentimes have a hard time with navigating the rain, which I understand. But there's nothing worse than driving in the rain and there's somebody with their like emergency signal on, and there's nothing wrong with the car, it's just raining really badly. So that brings me to my next con, which is the weather here. The weather here is bipolar. When I say bipolar, I mean it can literally, I will never forget, we were going like a mile down the road from our house. When we were in our neighborhood, it wasn't raining, it was fine. We left our neighborhood, it was raining. We went within that mile. Hear me when I tell you, within that mile, it was not raining again. Like, I was seriously shocked. I was like, and you can turn back and you're looking like, okay, the sky is pitch black, it's thunderstorm, and then you can drive literally 2-3 minutes down the road and it's no longer raining, there's no thunderstorms, there's nothing going on, and it's the craziest thing. The weather here is bipolar. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's hot, it's humid. The humidity, people ask me about it all the time. If you decide to move to Florida, depends on where you're coming from. Oftentimes anywhere else, you will have to change your skincare, you will have to change the way you do your makeup, the way you do your hair, just every little thing, because truly and honestly, even though I have been here for like 25 years, I seriously still have problems with my makeup slipping, sliding, my hair getting frizzy. You know, I would take the time to do something to it to zhuzh it up a little bit, and ooh girl, and still at the same time I would walk out and it would get frizzy, it would just fall flat, my makeup would start running, my skin feels like an alligator skin. Like, it's something that I have gotten used to over the years, and I've had to learn how to maintain my skin a little bit better. But at the same time, I have noticed that when I do travel to other places with much more less humid climate, my skin and my face and everything else does a little bit better, and it's just a better vibe, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, the weather here is bipolar. It does get cold here. Now compared to other places, it doesn't snow at all. You know, we do have hurricanes, we do have tornadoes. I think about last week we did have a tornado warning here, and it was a little scary, but nothing really happened, so you were fine. So that brings me to my next con, which is hurricanes. Yes, hurricanes are crazy. Yes, they can be scary, and I'm only talking about Orlando, and I'm only talking about based on where you are. Orlando is more inland, so we don't get a lot of the craziness that you hear about on the news. Again, my experience, I think the worst parts of the hurricane is the week or so before the hurricane is supposed to hit and the preparation for it, because people lose their minds, people go a little crazy, people are, you know, fighting with each other, people are just so mean and rude and so thoughtless with each other. So for me, it honestly comes down to basically preparing yourself way ahead in advance, so that when a hurricane does come, it doesn't feel like it hits you as hard as it would other people that maybe didn't prepare as well. You know, I definitely would recommend doing a hurricane kit and just being prepared for it, and then you're not as afraid when it does come. So I would definitely recommend that. I could do a video for you guys if you are interested in learning more about how to prepare for a hurricane, since yeah, I've been here for a while and I have seen the worst of a hurricane and I've seen the best of a hurricane, and honestly, I don't think it's a deal breaker. I don't think it's anything to be scared about. Personally, you just have to be prepared for it. And yeah, so my next con is that there are not a lot of free things here to do. Now, me and my husband, let's just be real, we're on a budget because we eventually want to buy a home. We're personally homebodies, but we also like to get out and do a lot of things. Now, Florida does not have a shortage of things to do, but the key word here is free. Florida does not have a lot of free things to do. I would never forget, we went to this event, it was supposed to be like art in the park or something like that, and it was a great event and we had such a good time, but the art was hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and the sculptures and all the other things that they had there could go up to like tens of thousands of dollars, and we're not balling like that. So we end up actually spending what was a ton of money on the food, and it literally was not that much food. So yeah, there are things to do, but in my opinion, and for a lot of the things that most people like to do, a lot of it is not free. You can still have a good time with going out with your friends and your family, but somewhere along the way you're gonna have to spend some kind of money. And that's one of the things that I just wish there was more things that were, you know, not breaking the budget. So the next thing I would definitely have to say is that, and this has to do with doing things that are costly, is overpriced restaurants. Now, Florida food scene, in my opinion, and after traveling to many of the places, is not the best. The food here, to me, is not that great. I do have my tried and true restaurants that I love to go to. It's an experience, and the food is worth the money. But there are a lot of restaurants here that are like Disney themed, and they're around the theme parks, and they're just around these really nice bougie areas, and they're really pricey. And you don't even realize how pricey sometimes they can be, because of the fact that a lot of us that live in Florida is kind of used to the prices of these restaurants. But after, again, traveling and seeing, that is a con for me, is that I don't want to go to a restaurant, get a mediocre at best meal, and still be paying $20-$30 for that meal. And that happens a lot, just because I think it's the area and the fact that it's Orlando. It's a very touristy town. The rent for these restaurants are really expensive, so they put that price back onto the consumer. But the quality and the whole experience of the restaurant is not always worth the price. So when you come here, you're really gonna have to have those experiences and find restaurants around your area that you really like. Now, the next con I would definitely have to say is that there is a ton of bugs. In Florida, there's this thing called a mosquito, and honestly, they're little terrorists to me, because girl, they're like something that comes, you don't see them coming, they bite you and you get bruised. At least I do. I have had reactions, really bad reactions to mosquito bites, and it's the worst thing, because you don't want to itch it, but you can't help but to itch that like scratch, but itching it just makes it worse. And you know, there are alligators here. I have had an interaction with an alligator. I can never forget the moment that me and my husband both went to his grandfather's house, and there was an alligator underneath his car, and I probably thought I was gonna die because in my opinion, it was a baby alligator, but when there's a baby around, there's a mama around, and I'm not messing with an alligator because I will lose. So yeah, there are bugs. There's a lot of bugs here. You're gonna have to deal with that. You can try to fix it or work with it somehow, but yeah, if you're not into bugs, they're not gonna bother you, but they are all around. And I think the worst ones that people don't realize until they get here is that we do have something called a love bug, and they're literally the worst things ever. They only come around during a certain season, so that's the only plus about it. But they get on your car, they get all over your car, and they're so hard to get off. They're not the easiest thing. They're super gross because they are actual bugs that you would have to clean off your car. So yeah, just be careful about that. The next thing is that rent here is very high, in my opinion, for Florida. Now, there are other places like San Francisco and California where the rent is very high there, but I think for Florida or Orlando, the rent could be very high. There are one bedrooms here that go between $1,000 to $1,500, depends on the area you're in, of course. And me and my husband have been looking for apartments for quite some time, and for the price and the apartment, they don't match up. So it's kind of like I don't want to spend $1,500 for a really tiny 1-bedroom apartment. So yeah, just be mindful of that, like when you're looking, that it can be pricey. And that brings me to my next thing, which is the jobs here are limited, especially if you're in a certain field. So be very, very mindful. And the jobs that they do have here, you are competing with thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are looking for the same jobs. I will never forget when I used to work at like Universal and Disney, there were people, new people all the time. People like rotating in and out, in and out, in and out. And it was, yeah, it's just the craziest thing. So just be very mindful of that. My next con, and this really does depend if you want to be here long term and get a home, but the architecture here are all the same. There are so many planned communities here. There are so many places and homes that look exactly, when I say exactly, I mean exactly the same. And there's not a lot of different or fun or creative or wacky architecture here. So if you're somebody who's really into getting something that's a little bit more unique in terms of like a home or in terms of like where you live, just know that it is gonna pretty much all be the same no matter where you go. Because yeah, we have looked at houses here for quite some time, and honestly sometimes we lose track of which ones we've seen because they honestly all look the same. So that's something that I've noticed here that is different. Another con that's on my list is that it takes forever to go anywhere in Florida. And what I mean by that is that if you decide to go to New York or California or Georgia, if you need a quick trip, if there's a family emergency, anything like that, Florida is the furthest from everything. So you have to be mindful of that and kind of always have a budget in mind of like traveling, emergency, or anything like that. Just because Florida is far, even just to leave Florida, it could take 8 to 10 hours. Or Orlando, it could take 8 to 10 hours, depends on where you are, just to leave the state. So just think about things like that. Yeah, so it's a big con for me because oftentimes I do want to visit my my sister-in-law, or go to New York, or go any of those places, and it's still a pretty hefty thought process to go to when you're, if there's an emergency, or if you just want to go somewhere really quickly or anything like that. Everything in Florida takes a while for us to go from place to place. Okay, so guys, and the next thing I can say is a con about Florida is that it is not pedestrian safe. I will never forget the moment that I actually had to end up walking home after a long day of work, and I had to walk at least, I would say, 1 mile to 1.5 miles before I got to the next crosswalk. There has been so many people that I have known and my husband have known that ride a bike and have gotten hit because people just don't care. The sidewalks, you can be walking and they will just randomly end out of nowhere, some most random things. So honestly and truly, if you're somebody who is into biking and walking, this might not be the best and most safest. And the next con will be is that you absolutely need a car. The public transportation here is awful. It's one of the worst I've ever seen. If you miss the bus, you will have to wait 30 minutes to an hour. I'll never forget the moment that I literally was early. I made it to the bus early, and not long after that, I literally was sitting down and the bus passed me by, and I could not be late to work, so I ran after the bus till the next stop, and then I got let on. But I was so angry and I was so upset that I was like, I had to have a car. And so yeah, this is one of those places that honestly having a car is the only way to get around, and you absolutely need a car, because if you don't have one, it will be the hardest time for you to get to the grocery store, go to work, go to school, do any of those things. And my next one con is getting on I-4. I-4, since I lived here, has been under construction. Seriously, it's one of the main roads that you have to get on unless you want to pay a toll, which paying tolls can get very, very, very pricey. I remember going across town and I paid about $5 in tolls, which I could not believe. So I definitely would recommend the toll. If you can pay for it, you can do an e-pass. But I-4 is a trip. One of the worst things about I-4 is the traffic, the people, and the fact that if you miss an exit, that is it. You will have to you'll get so frustrated because if you miss one exit, you will have to go at least 2 or 3 more exits to get off. And that's the worst thing. And then you have to turn back around, and now you're not 5 minutes late, you're 20 to 15 minutes late. So yeah, that is one of the worst things about I-4, is that once you get on there, it's kind of hard because you kind of want to pay attention. You never want to miss an exit, and you have to be very alert, because I think I-4 was named one of the deadliest or the most dangerous highways or something similar to that. So okay, so let me go ahead and do one last con, and this might not be a con to some people, but I have had people who have visited here and noticed it more than some of the other cons that I have mentioned, and that there is a lot. When I say a lot, there is a lot of elderly people that live here in Florida or Orlando, and sometimes you have to have patience, you have to be kind, and you have to, did I mention patience? Like I was, for example, I remember going into Publix, which is a local grocery store here, and I was making a casserole, so I really wanted this one, like just a few items just to finish out the casserole and make it perfect. And I remember going into the Publix, and I'm like, I told my husband, I'll be right back, let me just go do this, and blah 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 blah. This was supposed to be a 10-minute trip that turned into a 30-minute trip. I got into a line that was 10 items or less, and the elderly lady that was in front of me had way more than 10 items, by the way. But she was talking about her grandkids to the cashier, and they got into a full-on conversation, and I had already unloaded the belt and I didn't even realize. I ended up getting roped into a conversation and being stuck there in line for literally the longest time. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this has happened to me several times, like several times. It has happened to me in grocery stores, it has happened to me when I'm in a restaurant and I have a elderly waiter, which again, I love seeing, you know, elderly people that are still up and about and working and doing these fun things. But if you're somebody that's like movie go this might not be the best place for you, just because this is a very chillax, slow pace, everything's calm. Again, going back to the drivers, there are elderly people on the road. I can never ever forget when I got stuck behind one, and she was literally going 20 miles an hour, and she was driving like this. And I would never forget that because I was so late. It was a one-way road and I couldn't pass her, and I just remember seeing her and I'm like, oh my god, I was so upset. But you live and you learn, you live and you learn. So yeah, that is one of the last cons that I have, but I thought I would just mention it just because honestly, every time people visit here, that is one of the main things that they notice. Now let's go ahead and go on to the pros of living here in Florida, because you know what, Florida is not all bad. Now the first pro, and I know that I said it was a con, is that Florida has affordable living. And what I mean by that is, compared to New York, of course, compared to California, San Francisco, Seattle, all of the bigger major cities, Florida's rent and mortgage payments are not that bad. So that's why I'm saying it's affordable. Now, it's not always the cheapest, and I think people think it's cheaper than it is, because a one-bedroom going for $1,000 to $1,500 for Orlando, I do think that's pretty high, and it can be hard to pay that, like I said earlier, because of the fact that a lot of the jobs here are based on tourism. So yeah, I do think that there is affordable living. I do think it's possible to live here and afford to live here, compared to one of the more bigger cities, like I said, like New York or any of those. Okay, so the next pro of living here is that the scenery, it's so beautiful here. There are times where it's just really green, it's very lush. There's it's very green, it's very lush, everything is really beautiful, and it's a nice landscape. There's so much things to do in nature and all of those things. So I think it's very scenic here, and it can be very beautiful, and the weather is pretty good. I mean, I know humidity is a really big thing, but for the most part there's no snow, so that's a big pro to me, because I've never seen snow, which is such a random thing. So I don't even know if I would like it or not. Okay, so my next pro about living in Florida is going to be that there is plenty of things to do. Now I know I said it was a con that there was not a lot of, I know my con was that there's not a lot of free things, but that doesn't mean there's not a lot to do. You can do a different thing every single day and never be bored and never do the same thing twice. Florida always has something going on. There's so many places to go. There's so many places and things to see. You can never be bored. We're filled, like it's filled to the rim here with nothing but theme parks like Disney, Universal, Fun Spot, Busch Gardens. It's about an hour away from here, so it is a little bit of a drive, but it's totally worth it to go to Busch Gardens. And there's the Upside Down House, there's International Drive. I mean, there's so much to do here that seriously you can never be bored. The only thing that makes it a little bit different is that when you are here and you have bills and other responsibilities, a lot of those things fall to the wayside. But the pro is that you can never be bored here. So my next tip is going to be, or my next pro is going to be that you are relatively close to a lot of beaches here. Now I'm going to be really real with you and let you know that the beaches here are not all of that, at least the ones that are close to us like Daytona and Cocoa. And a lot of the residents that live in that area or people who go visit those beaches, in my opinion, they don't really take care of them. There are sharks here, there are, you know, jelly. I wish I still had the picture because we went to the beach once and it was filled. It was filled with like jellyfish or something that washed up from the water, and it was really beautiful and interesting to see, but it was kind of like scary because I think my husband said that they were dangerous or poisonous or something like that. So yeah, it's like you are close to the beach if you think an hour is close, but it is close relative to where you live. Next thing I had to say is a pro here is that there is a lot of diversity here. As long as I have lived here, I have never met a Florida native, like somebody who was born in Florida, or somebody who was raised in Florida, who's never lived anywhere else. Everyone that I have ever met that lives here either comes from some other country, that comes from another state, or anything like that. I have never ever in all my years of living here have met somebody who is born, raised, and has lived in Florida for most of their lives. So I think there's a lot of diversity in people like that, and I think that could be a very interesting thing if you're somebody who's more outgoing or somebody who's just interested in learning about more different cultures that is around you. So the next and the biggest pro of living in Florida is the Florida discount. Now, living in Florida, again, there are so many theme parks here that you want to go to all of them, but it would be nice to have a good discount. I know for sure that Disney has a Florida discount, SeaWorld has one. I mean, I believe all the big theme parks and the small ones have some type of discount that you can get for just being a Florida resident and showing your ID. And I do believe that Reddit has a forum that they let you know if there's anything for the Florida discount that you can get. So yeah, that's a really big pro about living here in Florida, is that you can get a pretty hefty discount in all of the theme parks and all the things that we offer you. So yeah, that is my pros and cons list of living here in Florida. I like living here in Florida. I don't know if it's gonna be my forever place, but for sure for just a little bit longer, I do, you know, I like living here. And yeah, I like living here. I don't know, I just, sometimes it's crazy to me for people to say that they thought I lived in like California and Arizona and all of these places, and no, I'm a Florida girl. I've been here for about 20 or 25 years about. And so yeah, that's all I have for this video. Alright, so thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to check me out on Instagram. So hopefully you guys have learned a lot about me and what I think of Florida, the pros and cons, and hopefully this video can help you decide whether or not you would like to live in Florida full-time, part-time, or just not at all. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Be kind to yourself. Bye.